Tánaiste, good morning.
Good morning, Pat.
I've asked this question again and again of everyone who comes in. What exactly are we recognising?
We're recognizing a Palestinian state um, in terms of the 1967 borders as determined by a resolution of the United Nations. That is what we are recognizing. That's fundamentally it. It will mean, in practical terms, that we will conduct our relations with the Palestinian state now through the Palestinian Authority as two equal states, upgrading our representative office to that of an embassy, and the Palestinian representative office in Dublin will be upgraded to the status of an embassy also.
Yeah. And what of Hamas? They run Gaza, which is part of the two-state solution. Will they be part of the office in Dublin?
Recognition does not, no, they are not part of the office in Dublin. But recognition does not involve recognition of a government. It involves recognition of a state.
That's what I'm struggling with, because...
Well, we do that with every other state, We don't determine who the governments of any particular state are. And in my speech today, I made the point that we expect, the Palestinian state to afford full human rights, democracy, good governance to the people of Palestine.
Do you want? Will you insist upon in this recognition that the Palestinian state also recognises the right of Israel to exist?
Yes, the Palestinian Authority has recognised the right of Israel to exist. We have listed, along with our EU colleagues as part of the European Union, Hamas as a terrorist organisation. Ireland has supported 2 packages of sanctions against Hamas. We see this very much as endeavouring to empower moderation. We believe Israeli strategy and policy over the years has actually empowered extremism and has given rise and strengthened Hamas. That is our strategic view, and not just us, but the views of most of the Arab states that have been involved, that we've been in discussions with over the last year around this question. They have sought a negotiated solution. It's the only way forward. And it's in that context that the recognition of the state of Palestine should be seen.
Now, what you've said is that you're recognising the state of Palestine as the pre-67 borders of that state, which had 2 component parts and still does. The West Bank was, up to 67, administered by Jordan, and Gaza was administered by Egypt. So have you had talks with Jordan or with Egypt about their willingness to retake those responsibilities?
I've had ongoing and very, very regular discussions with Jordan and with Egypt in respect of this entire issue. And the view is, as I've said in my speech, we're recognising a Palestinian state, which they support, which involves both, the West Bank, Gaza, and indeed the capital of both states in Jerusalem and in East Jerusalem.
And East Jerusalem was administered by Jordan up to 67 as well.
But the issue is that a new state, the recognition of the state based on the 67 borders, it would be Palestinians who would be responsible for the governance. So we're talking about an independent, a democratic, a contiguous, sovereign, viable state of Palestine, with Jerusalem as the future capital of both states, of both Israel and the state of Palestine.
But the movers and shakers in Gaza are Hamas. And as we know, a few days ago, the International Criminal Court, not alone do they want to have arrest warrants for Netanyahu and the Minister for Defense in Israel, but also for leaders of Hamas. So to what extent are we kind of recognizing the administration in Gaza, who may go on?
There's a fundamental point, Pat. When we recognize states, we don't recognize. It's not recognizing the government of the day or the current government. That applies to every state we've recognized across the world, and our policies and our diplomatic engagement. Obviously, very often can change and evolve in respect of criticising governments or calling for reforms and so on like that. And we've been very consistent in calling for reforms of the Palestinian Authority, for example, as have other European Union countries. And that has been responded to, by the way, in terms of a new Prime Minister being appointed, Mohammed Mustafa, who I spoke with yesterday. They have an ambitious program of reform. I think there is a clear move on now in the aftermath of this war, and we hope this terrible war comes to an end soon, that there will be a technocratic government installed in Gaza that would administer and govern Gaza. Because don't forget that the Palestinian Authority still pays for the Department of Education employees, health employees, teachers in the schools in Gaza, and so forth. So the agenda will be very much in terms of the reconstruction of Gaza, that a new government has to go in there, and that would have the support of other Arab states in terms of funding its capacity, but also funding the reconstruction of Gaza in terms of the rebuilding of schools which have been leveled, the rebuilding of health clinics, hospitals, water treatment plants. I mean, the entire place has been leveled, and it will take a concerted international effort.
I mean, this is also Netanyahu's plan. He was under pressure from Benny Gantz to articulate what happens after. And he envisaged a Gaza administered by what he called the friendly Arab states, who have shown no appetite to undertake this task. So it's still a bit of a mystery. I mean, you're making this move in a preemptive way, I suppose, to try to encourage that process.
We are, and to be fair to those states, I mean, there was discussions in Aqaba and in Sharm el-Sheikh before this war happened, in 2023 early, and agreements were arrived at in terms of, for example, freezing settlements, and Israel would have signed up to those agreements involving Jordan, Egypt, and the Palestinian Authority. But unfortunately, Egypt did not follow through and implement those agreements at the time. And it's an awful pity that I think they didn't and negotiated. And I think there will be the only way through this is for negotiations and involving those Arab states. And they are committed to such negotiations, but they're predicated on recognition, and they said this to us, and they've already presented a peace initiative and plan and framework to the United States. They will be presenting that framework to the EU member states on Sunday next, and I'll be attending that.
Necessarily trust Egypt. We learned last night that an Egyptian official, when the peace plan had been agreed with the say-so of the United States and Israel, and it was presented to Hamas, and an official looking at the plan figured it would not be acceptable to Hamas, and without telling the Americans or the Israelis, he changed the offer. Hamas accepted it, and we saw joy on the streets of Gaza when it appeared we had a ceasefire, and it turned out this was the work of one Egyptian official who messed about with the offer.
Well, that's in a specific case in terms of that specific offer, and look, there's been many iterations of those talks around the ceasefire. And I don't think it all boils down to that one specific incident. But
that was the one that led to joy on the streets of Gaza, where people thought, finally, we have peace.
Yeah, but the only way you get a ceasefire is when all of them collectively at the one time agree it. And that hasn't happened. And there's been many highs and lows in respect of those talks around the ceasefire. And we desperately need a ceasefire, and we desperately need the release of the hostages. But there were fairly substantive negotiations that happened involving Jordan, Egypt, and others, and Israel and the Palestinian Authority, and they created the potential for progress in Aqaba and in Sharm el-Sheikh, and there was huge disillusionment when those weren't followed through. And look, it is complex, and there are different perspectives from the different countries in the region. And for example, the Arab Peace Initiative does recognise the need for Israeli security. That is accepted. That Israel's security has to be upheld.
Now, one of the things that happened after the invasion of Ukraine was there were calls for the expulsion of the Russian ambassador. Again, after the invasion of Gaza by Israel, there were calls for the expulsion of the Israeli ambassador. And at all stages in both of those conflicts, the government has been saying, no, it's good to talk. We need to keep the lines of communication open. And now, on foot of this decision this morning, the Israeli ambassador to Ireland has been recalled. So, those lines of communication have been severed.
No, severed is, I would suggest, too strong a word. I think I anticipated that this would happen. We have to stay firm and focused. I believe fundamentally, Pat, in diplomacy. I believe in keeping diplomatic channels open. Ireland has no wish to in any way reduce or undermine diplomatic contact with Israel, or indeed with other states, that we have diplomatic channels open and established, because diplomatic channels are needed most of all in a time of crisis, and that is the fundamental view we take, and again, when it came to getting up to 100 Irish citizens out of Gaza, it was diplomacy was responsible for that, and the work of our ambassador in Tel Aviv, in Sonia McGuinness, and our ambassador in Egypt, who worked very hard and intensively and effectively in that operation. I mean, that it gives the value in terms of the consular dimension and improving or helping citizens in distress, but also the political and diplomatic channels are necessary in terms of understanding everybody's perspectives, understanding the Israeli perspective, the Egyptian, the Jordanian, and so forth. So I'm very clear about the need for diplomatic channels to be kept open. It's simple and it's easy to sort of just end diplomatic relationships, but I'm not so sure what ultimately it achieves. I mean, I had similar calls correctly in terms of the Russian ambassador. I had similar calls in respect of the Iranian ambassador. And, if one could actually selectively go through quite a number of states and say, well, we don't agree with their policy or don't agree with what they're doing, let's sever diplomatic relationships. And I'm not so sure that would advance the cause of peace or the cause of good relations, because remember, our diplomatic relationship with a state involves the people, and there are different perspectives and different views within the Israeli state, within different states on any given subject.
Now, we have our own autonomy, so we can decide what we want to do, and we have done so this morning, along with Norway, and perhaps there are others to follow. What do you think the impact will be? How will you know that this policy is vindicated? What results can we see flowing from this that will say, yes, we were right to do it, and to do it at this particular time?
Well, I think I don't necessarily like the word vindicate, but I take your point. My view would be that we were situating this very much in the context of the Arab Contact Group and the peace initiative, and principally countries like Jordan, Egypt, UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar and others, with the Palestinian Authority, have developed a peace framework which they have presented to the US, will be presenting to the European Union. And within that framework, we believe there are very strong principles that could underpin a peace process and a political track after this war. And recognition is part of that peace framework and peace initiative. And ultimately, we believe genuinely that we have taken the right initiative at this time, because it was in the program for government, but we did say it was a timing. There was a timing aspect to it, and also a context. And the context in this case is a significant initiative by the Arab states who want stability in the region.
And do you think this will impact on
sustainability?
Will it impact on our relations with the United States, both as a government and some of those multinational companies who have set up here, who have relations with Israel and are totally supportive of Israel?
Yeah, I think people do appreciate our perspective and our honest broker and bona fides in respect of this. I mean, I've been to the United States last February, where we've broached these issues with officials in the United States, so it was no surprise that we were going to do this. I mean, they would have a different perspective, I've no doubt about that, in terms of timing and in terms of approach. But I do think there's an understanding of our genuine commitment to a peaceful resolution of the complex issue that this is, and complex conflict that this is.
And finally, I suppose I should ask you about, you talk about timing, and cynics will say this is all about local elections, seeing thousands of mostly young people on the streets supporting Palestine. So let's recognize Palestine and see, does that blow us some votes in our direction?
No, I mean, I think it's nearly 6 months ago now, I hosted a dinner in Brussels with about 7 EU countries where we discussed this issue. We've had ongoing issues with Spain, consultations with Spain, and Spain and Ireland agreed some time ago that we would do this. And then we were working also with Norway. I would have met with the Norwegian Foreign Minister in Munich at the Security Council, and they were very interested in doing this. Other states like Slovenia, Belgium and others were involved in those discussions. And each state has to make a call. But I think we were doing it in coordination with Spain and Norway in particular. And that really was more influential in the timing than anything else.
All right. Minister for Foreign Affairs, Tánaiste Micheál Martin, thank you very much for joining us on the programme.